O'Hare Airport. Christmas Eve. A blizzard had locked every terminal, stranding thousands of passengers, with nowhere left to go. Daniel Carter sat rigid in a plastic chair near gate H7, his daughter Emma beside him, 8 years old, earbuds and eyes locked on her tablet, a wall of silence he had long since stopped knowing how to climb. Then a small hand touched his sleeve. A girl, maybe 5, looked straight up at him, with unsettling calm. "Are you lost too?" she asked. Daniel said nothing. Not because he didn't have an answer. Because he did. Daniel Carter was not a man who waited well. In every boardroom, every negotiation, every situation where other men hesitated, he moved first and moved fast. He had built a logistics company from a single leased warehouse into a 9-figure operation before he turned 42. And he had done it by treating uncertainty the way most people treated weather, something to be prepared for, managed, and ultimately overridden. Control was not a personality flaw for Daniel. It was a professional skill he had never learned to turn off, which made O'Hare Airport on Christmas Eve something close to a personal punishment. Every departure board in Terminal H read the same word: delayed. The blizzard outside had reduced the runway to a gray blur, and the terminal had filled up over the past 3 hours until it resembled something between a refugee camp and a mall the week before Christmas. Families spread across the floor on bundled coats. Children chased each other between rows of fixed plastic chairs. A couple near gate H4 argued in low, clipped voices, while their toddler slept across both their laps, unbothered by either the noise or the tension. Daniel sat at gate H7 and did not argue with anyone. He simply sat, laptop open, a spreadsheet on the screen he had not actually read in 40 minutes. His carry-on was at his feet, perfectly aligned with the chair leg. His phone was face down on his knee, and beside him, close enough that her shoulder occasionally touched his arm, sat Emma, 8 years old, earbuds and eyes fixed on the cartoon, playing on her tablet, as unreachable as if she were on a different continent. He had bought her the tablet 7 months ago. At the time, he told himself it was practical. She could watch things on flights, stay occupied during long work, dinners, have something that was entirely hers. What he had not admitted, not even quietly, was that it was also convenient. A child with a tablet did not ask questions. A child with a tablet did not look at him the way Emma had been looking at him since her mother died, with that careful, assessing silence that made him feel like he was always one wrong word away from something he could not fix. Her mother's name had been Claire. She died 22 months ago from an aneurysm that gave no warning and asked no permission, and the version of Daniel Carter, who had existed before that Tuesday morning, had not entirely survived it either. He had handled the funeral, the paperwork, the school meetings, the therapist appointments, all of it with the same structured efficiency he brought to quarterly reviews. What he had not handled was the part that couldn't be put in a folder, the part that was still 8 years old and sleeping 10 feet away from him every night in a room full of drawings she no longer made. There was a small wooden bird in the inside pocket of his jacket. Claire had carved it herself, badly lopsidedly, during a weekend trip to Vermont the year before Emma was born. She had given it to him as a joke, said it was supposed to be a sparrow, but looked more like a potato with wings. He had kept it anyway. He kept it still, though he could not have explained to anyone, including himself, exactly why. Emma's cartoon made a sound effect, something cheerful and high-pitched, and she smiled faintly at the screen. Daniel watched her smile the way a man watches something through glass. Present, separated. That was when the small hand touched his sleeve. Daniel looked down. A girl stood beside his chair, no taller than his elbow, wearing a red wool coat with 2 buttons missing from the collar. She had dark curly hair pulled into uneven pigtails, a candy cane tucked into her coat pocket, and an expression of complete, almost eerie composure for a child who was clearly alone. She looked up at him with brown eyes that held no panic, only a kind of direct, unblinking curiosity. "Are you lost too?" she asked. Daniel stared at her. "What? I'm lost," she said, as though clarifying a minor scheduling conflict. "I stopped at the candy stand, and then my mom wasn't there anymore. I've been walking around for a little while." She tilted her head. "You look like you don't know where you're going either." Daniel opened his mouth to say something sensible and efficient, that she should come with him immediately to the nearest security desk, that someone was looking for her right now, that everything would be resolved quickly and correctly. He got as far as drawing breath before he heard a sound to his left that stopped him entirely. Emma had taken out her earbuds. She was sitting forward, tablet resting on her knees, looking at the girl with an expression Daniel had not seen on his daughter's face in longer than he could accurately measure. Not guarded, not careful. Simply open the way she used to look before she learned to protect herself from disappointment. "What's your name?" Emma asked. The girl in the red coat answered without hesitation. "Sophie." "I'm Emma." Emma shifted slightly, angling her tablet toward Sophie, the way children instinctively offer the thing they value most to someone they've decided to trust. "Do you want to watch with me while my dad figures out what to do?" Sophie considered this for approximately 1 second, then climbed up into the seat on Emma's other side with the efficiency of someone who had already decided. She leaned in toward the tablet. Emma leaned in too. Their shoulders touched. Neither of them seemed to find this remarkable. Daniel sat between his daughter and a lost child, and the spreadsheet on his laptop screen felt for the first time all evening genuinely absurd. The correct answer was simple. He knew it immediately. There was a security desk 40 meters down the terminal, staffed and visible. Lost children were handled there every day, processed through a system designed precisely for this. He could walk Sophie over in under 3 minutes, confirm she was in the right hands, and return to gate H7. Clean. Efficient. Done. He pulled out his phone and found the airport's non-emergency line. He was halfway through dialing when Emma said, without looking up from the tablet, "Sophie says her mom has a blue jacket and a really big suitcase with a broken wheel. It makes a scraping sound." Daniel looked at his daughter. She was still watching the screen, but she was describing what Sophie had told her with the focused tone of someone who considered this information relevant and expected it to be used. Sophie nodded seriously beside her, confirming the details like a witness at a deposition. "She also had a coffee," Sophie added, "from the place with the green sign." Daniel put his phone down. He did not do it because the security desk was too far, or because the airport system was unreliable. He did it because in that moment, Emma was leaning toward him just slightly, just enough waiting to see what he would do. And it was the first time in 22 months that she had leaned toward him instead of away. He closed the laptop. He stood up. He looked at both girls, one a stranger's, and heard himself say in a voice that came out steadier than he felt, "All right, let's go find her." Emma pulled out her earbuds fully and tucked them into her pocket. She took Sophie's hand. Sophie did not resist. The three of them stepped into the moving, crowded, indifferent chaos of O'Hare Terminal H, and Daniel Carter, who had not been uncertain about anything in years, had absolutely no idea what he was doing. That he realized was probably the most honest thing about him right now. Terminal H at 9:47 on Christmas Eve was not a place designed for searching. It was a place designed for waiting. And when thousands of people were forced to do something, they were all equally bad. At the result was a specific kind of low-grade human chaos that Daniel recognized, but had never before been required to navigate on foot, with 2 small children, no plan, and a missing woman described only by her jacket color and the sound her luggage made. They moved through the terminal in a loose formation, Daniel slightly ahead, Emma and Sophie side by side behind him, still holding hands. Sophie's red coat made her easy to track in peripheral vision, which was useful because Daniel's attention kept getting pulled in 4 directions at once. He checked faces, scanned jackets, listened for the scrape of a damaged wheel against tile floors. The terminal gave him back noise. Bodies, the smell of reheated food from a vendor cart, a child crying somewhere near the restrooms, and a gate agent announcing over the intercom that Flight 742 to Denver would be delayed an additional 2 hours. "Do you remember anything else about where you last saw her?" Daniel asked, keeping his voice level and practical. He was looking ahead, scanning a cluster of people near a Starbucks. The green sign the right color, but the crowd was 3 deep and shifting constantly. Sophie thought about this with an expression of genuine effort. There was a Christmas tree, a fake one, with silver things on it. She gestured vaguely to her left. And it smelled like cinnamon, like a candle, but from a store. Emma, walking beside her, said, "There's a candle store back near the entrance to this terminal. I saw it when we came in." She said it matter-of-factly, like she had simply been paying attention all along, storing details in case they became useful. Daniel looked back at her. She was not looking at him. She was scanning the crowd ahead, the same way he was methodical focused. He did not say anything. He turned back and adjusted their direction. They passed a family of 6, sprawled across a corner of floor space, every member of them asleep at different angles, like the aftermath of a gentle explosion. They passed a man in a suit jacket arguing quietly into his phone, one hand pressed to his ear. His expression the particular grimness of someone delivering bad news to someone who had been expecting good news. They passed a row of vending machines, where 2 teenagers were splitting a bag of chips and watching the blizzard through the floor-to-ceiling windows with the detached interest of people watching a documentary about someone else's problem. No blue jacket, no scraping suitcase, no sign of a woman who looked like she had lost something irreplaceable. Daniel found the candle store. It was a narrow shop, wedged between a newsstand and a gate waiting area, its entrance framed by a small artificial Christmas tree strung with silver ornaments. The cinnamon smell was unmistakable, even from 10 feet away. Sophie stopped in front of it and said with quiet certainty, "Yes, this is the smell." But her mother was not there. There were strangers standing in the store's entrance, a couple examining a display of wax warmers, a woman in a yellow coat on her phone. No blue jacket, no broken-wheeled suitcase. Daniel stood in front of the tree and ran the calculation quickly. They had been walking for nearly 15 minutes, covering maybe a third of the terminal. The gate was back the other direction. Their carry-on bags were still beside the chairs at HR7, and the departure board above them now showed his flight to Portland, moving from delayed to a status that simply read, "Monitor." He looked at Emma. She was crouched down in front of the tree at eye level, with Sophie asking her something in a low voice. Sophie was answering, and whatever she was saying made Emma nod slowly, like she was committing it to memory. Daniel watched his daughter, the way she angled her whole body toward the smaller girl. The patience in her posture, the absence of that careful wall she wore like a second skin around him, and felt something in his chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with the search. He was watching his daughter be kind to a stranger in a way she no longer knew how to be with him, and the specific weight of that observation settled somewhere below his ribs and stayed there. Emma stood up and turned to face Daniel. Sophie thinks her mom might have gone back toward the food court because that's where she said they were going before the candy stand. Sophie just got distracted and turned the wrong way. She delivered this the way she might report a finding, clear, organized, no editorializing. "She's really good at remembering things," Sophie offered, looking up at Emma with the straightforward admiration of a child who did not yet understand that admiration needed to be rationed. Emma's expression shifted barely just at the corners, but Daniel caught it, a flicker of something that was almost a smile, the involuntary kind that a person cannot manufacture because it comes from being seen rather than from trying to appear a certain way. They turned back toward the food court. The food court at O'Hare Terminal H, during a weather delay, was its own contained world. Louder, warmer, saturated with the smell of fast food, and too many people in too small a space. Every table was occupied. Every counter had a line. People had turned their trays into campsites, surrounding themselves with carry-on bags and charging cables, and the determined expressions of travelers who had accepted that tonight was no longer going anywhere. Sophie walked between Daniel and Emma, her head moving left and right, with the systematic focus of a child doing exactly what she had been asked to do. Every few steps, she rose slightly onto her toes, as if the extra inch might make the difference. Emma stayed close beside her, one hand still in Sophie's, her free hand occasionally pointing. There. No, what about over there, narrating what she saw in short, useful phrases. Daniel followed them and did something he almost never did in a situation that required action. He stayed quiet and watched. He watched Emma scan the crowd with an attention that had nothing to do with tablets or screens or the careful management of emotional distance. She was entirely present in a way she had not been in his company for longer than he could stand to calculate accurately. She had a system. She was checking by color, first blue jackets, then moving to luggage. When she spotted a woman in a navy coat near the sandwich counter, she tapped Sophie's arm and pointed, and Sophie looked and shook her head, and Emma simply nodded and moved on. No frustration, no performance, just a child who had decided this mattered and was doing the work. Daniel thought about the last time he had seen her like this, wholly engaged, unguarded, moving through the world like someone who still believed the world was worth engaging with. He could not place it. That was the part that hit him, standing in the middle of a crowded food court, with Christmas music leaking out of a speaker, above the pretzel counter. He could not remember the last time. Not because it hadn't happened, but because he had not been paying the right kind of attention when it did. He had been present in the logistical sense for every one of the past 22 months. He had been at school pickup and dentist appointments and the parent-teacher conference, where Emma's teacher, a careful woman named Mrs. Alvarez, had said that Emma was performing well academically, but had become notably quiet and seemed to prefer working alone. He had nodded and taken the observation seriously and added it to the mental folder labeled Things to Address when he had processed everything else first. That folder had not been opened. He had told himself that giving Emma space was the respectful choice, that she needed time the same way he needed time, and that forcing connection would only push her further back. He had told himself this in various forms for the better part of 2 years, and standing here now, watching his 8-year-old daughter lead a search for a stranger's lost mother through a blizzard-stalled airport with more warmth and presence than she had shown him in recent memory, he understood with uncomfortable clarity that what he had called giving space and what it had actually looked like from Emma's side of the room were probably not the same thing at all. Sophie suddenly stopped walking. She grabbed Emma's wrist with both hands. "The wheel," she said. "I can hear the wheel." They all went still and listened. The food court noise was substantial voices, chair legs, a television mounted on the wall showing weather coverage, the clatter of a tray being dropped somewhere to the right. But underneath it, coming from the direction of the main corridor, there was a rhythmic scraping sound, a wheel dragging on tile, uneven, persistent, getting slightly louder. They moved toward it. Daniel stepped ahead, clearing a path through the crowd, and Sophie and Emma followed close behind. They came out of the food court and into the main corridor of Terminal H, and Daniel scanned left, then right, and saw her. A woman in a blue jacket, mid-30s, a large rolling suitcase behind her, its back left wheel grinding audibly against the floor. She was moving fast, her head turning in both directions, a coffee cup from Starbucks still in her hand, though she had clearly forgotten about it. Her face was a specific expression Daniel recognized, not from his own experience, but from the one time Emma had gotten separated from him in a department store when she was 3 years old. That 4-minute window before he found her behind a rack of coats, the controlled, barely contained terror of a parent whose body is still moving, while the mind has already begun bargaining. Sophie saw her at the same moment and released Emma's hand. "Mom." She did not shout it. She said it the way you say something when you are finally allowed to stop being calm, and then she started running. The woman in the blue jacket heard it before she saw it. She stopped walking, turned toward the sound, and in the half-second before Sophie reached her, her face went through relief, grief, and something that looked like pure animal gratitude all at once. She dropped to her knees on the terminal floor, letting go of the suitcase handle and the coffee cup in the same motion, and caught Sophie with both arms. The coffee cup fell and rolled. No one nearby paid it any particular attention. Daniel stayed where he was. Emma stood slightly behind him, and to his left, her arms at her sides, watching the reunion with an expression he could not fully read. The woman was holding Sophie with the specific grip of someone who had been imagining the alternative for the past 20 minutes and needed several seconds to convince themselves that the alternative had not happened. Sophie said into her mother's shoulder, "I wasn't scared. A man and a girl helped me look for you." The woman looked up over Sophie's head. Her eyes found Daniel, then Emma. She mouthed something that looked like thank you, and her chin was unsteady when she did it. Daniel nodded. He did not know what else to do with his hands, so he put them in his pockets. An airport security officer appeared from the direction of the information desk, slightly out of breath, a radio in his hand. He confirmed Sophie's name, confirmed the woman was her mother, confirmed the situation was resolved. He said something about the family assistance area near the center of the terminal and suggested they complete the documentation process there. The woman still holding Sophie's hand, with the intensity of someone who had decided she was not releasing it again until they reached their destination, whatever destination that turned out to be, agreed, and thanked the officer and thanked Daniel again, and looked at Emma with an expression of genuine warmth. "She helped a lot," Daniel said, gesturing toward Emma. "She was the one who figured out the route." Emma looked at the floor. Then Sophie turned back and did something that nobody had asked her to do and nobody had predicted. She walked the 3 steps back to Emma, stood in front of her, and said, "I hope you find what you're looking for too." Then she turned back to her mother, and the 3 of them, Sophie, her mother, Laura, and the security officer, walked away toward the family assistance area, the broken suitcase wheel scraping an uneven rhythm against the tile until they turned a corner and the sound disappeared. Emma watched them go. Daniel watched Emma. The corridor felt larger now than it had a minute ago. The family assistance area was a small glassed-in room near the center of Terminal H, furnished with 4 upholstered chairs and a table with a box of tissues on it that had clearly been used recently. A woman from airport staff sat behind a counter completing paperwork with Laura, while Sophie sat in one of the chairs and ate the candy cane from her coat pocket with the composed satisfaction of someone who had had quite an adequate evening. Daniel and Emma stood outside the glass, visible but separate, watching the last formality of the situation resolve itself. It was technically unnecessary for them to be there. The job was finished. They could walk back to Gate H7, retrieve the carry-on bags, and wait for the boarding announcement that the departure board had been suggesting was coming within the next 40 minutes. Neither of them moved. Inside the room, Laura finished the paperwork and knelt down in front of Sophie's chair. She said something to her daughter that the glass made inaudible, and Sophie nodded, then said something back. Laura's face crumpled briefly, then steadied. She pulled Sophie into another hug, less frantic this time, but no less complete. Daniel watched this and felt the specific, disorienting sensation of being shown something he had once possessed and no longer could locate. He remembered the department store, Emma at 3 years old, missing for 4 minutes between the coats. He remembered the feeling of finding her sitting cross-legged on the floor, examining a dropped earring she'd found completely unaware, that anything unusual had occurred. He remembered picking her up and holding her in a way that had startled her, because the intensity of his relief was not something she had context for yet. She had patted his shoulder blade with her small hand. "Daddy, okay," she had said, like he was the one who needed reassurance. He had not thought about that moment in 2 years. He thought about it now, watching Laura hold Sophie, and understood that the fear he had felt in the department store had never actually left him. It had simply changed form. It had stopped being fear of losing Emma in a crowd and become somewhere in the long wreckage of the past 22 months, fear of everything he did not know how to give her and could not manufacture with a spreadsheet or a strategy or the controlled efficiency that had served him in every other area of his life. He had been afraid. So he had gotten quiet. And Emma, 8 years old, and already learning how to read the room, had gotten quiet back. That was the transaction. That was what 2 years looked like if you stopped lying about it. Emma spoke without preamble, still looking through the glass. "If I got lost," she said, "would you actually come find me?" Daniel turned to look at her. She was not looking at him. She was watching Sophie, who had climbed back onto Laura's lap and was now pointing at something outside the window, probably the snow, with the easy proprietary delight of a child who has returned to her rightful place in the world and finds it exactly as she left it. Daniel opened his mouth. He had an answer. For the first time in a long time, he had a clear and unambiguous answer that was not hedged or managed or restructured to protect himself from the weight of saying it out loud. He could feel it there, the right words, ready for once, and then the intercom above their heads activated with a 2-tone chime. "Ladies and gentlemen, Flight 219 to Portland is now beginning the boarding process at Gate H7. All passengers, please make your way to the gate." Emma straightened. The thing that had been open in her face, that briefly unguarded, briefly waiting quality, closed, not quickly, not dramatically. Just the gradual, practiced shutdown of someone who had learned that the right moment is usually followed by the wrong timing. She reached into her coat pocket and took out her earbuds. She put one in, then the other. She turned from the glass toward the direction of Gate H7. "We should go," she said. Daniel stood in the corridor and did not move for a full 3 seconds. The boarding announcement continued overhead. The terminal moved around him. Through the glass, Sophie was laughing at something her mother had said, and the sound of it did not reach him. And he was aware that the most important question his daughter had ever asked him was still hanging in the air between them, unanswered, getting smaller by the second. He followed Emma toward the gate. He could not think of a single thing to say that would not arrive too late. The boarding process at Gate H7 took 11 minutes. Daniel and Emma did not speak during any of them. They found their seats row 14 window and middle. Emma having taken the window without discussion, the same way she had claimed the window on every flight since she was old enough to have a preference. Daniel stowed their carry-on bags in the overhead bin, sat down and buckled his seatbelt. Emma was already buckled. She had her tablet-out earbuds in the same cartoon from earlier, resuming as though the last 2 hours had been a commercial break, rather than the most emotionally significant stretch of time Daniel had experienced in the past 22 months. The plane filled slowly around them. A man in a green parka dropped something in the aisle and apologized to no one in particular. A flight attendant walked the length of the cabin with the practiced composure of someone who had worked a blizzard delay on Christmas Eve before and had developed useful internal policies about it. Overhead, the ventilation system pushed recycled air in a thin, steady stream. Daniel looked at the seat back in front of him. Emma's question was still there. It had not diminished during the boarding process, or the 11 minutes of silence, or the business of stowing bags and finding seats. It had simply waited, patient and immovable, the way the things that actually matter have a way of waiting while everything logistical gets handled first. "If I got lost, would you actually come find me?" 7 words from an 8-year-old. and he had stood in a corridor with the answer fully formed in his chest and let a boarding announcement take the moment away from him. He had let a boarding announcement take the moment away from him. He turned that fact over once, and it sat very badly. The cabin door was closed. The flight attendants began their safety demonstration at the front of the aircraft, gesturing to exits and oxygen masks, with the synchronized calm of people performing a ritual no one believes they will ever need. Daniel watched without seeing. Beside him, Emma's cartoon made a soft musical sound. Her left hand rested on her knee loose, and still close enough that the sleeve of her jacket touched his armrest. He thought about what Mrs. Alvarez had said, notably quiet, prefers working alone. He thought about the folder he had labeled Things to Address. When he had processed everything else first, and the specific self-deception required to maintain a folder like that for 22 months, while telling yourself it reflected good intentions rather than cowardice. He thought about Emma in the food court, rising onto her toes, scanning for a blue jacket entirely present, in a way she never was around him, and understood with a clarity he could not soften or reframe that his daughter had not stopped being present. She had stopped being present with him. Those were not the same problem, and only one of them was hers to fix. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and closed his fingers around the small wooden bird. It was lopsided, slightly rough in places where the carving had not gone smoothly small enough to sit entirely in one palm. Claire had made it on a Saturday afternoon, with a cheap whittling kit she bought at a Vermont general store on a whim, on the kind of weekend that felt ordinary while it was happening, and irreplaceable in memory. She had held it out to him when she finished, and said with complete sincerity, "I was going for a sparrow. I'm aware that's not what happened." He had laughed. He had kept it. He had carried it in the inside pocket of his jacket for 4 years and 11 months first, because it made him smile, then because she was gone, and then because putting it down felt like a form of surrender he was not ready to commit to. He sat with it in his fist and looked at his daughter, who was watching her cartoon and pretending with considerable skill for her age that he was not there. The plane had begun to push back from the gate, the slow mechanical reverse that marks the point of no return on any departure, when Daniel made the decision. Not dramatically, not with any particular feeling of courage, simply with the recognition that there was no further reason to wait, and that every second he continued to wait was a second he was choosing on behalf of both of them. He reached over and touched Emma's arm, not the sleeve, her arm. She felt the difference. He could tell by the way she went very still before she looked at him. She pulled one earbud out. Just one. The other stayed in a small reservation of exit she was keeping available. She looked at him with the careful measuring expression she had been giving him for 2 years, the one that assessed how much to risk before committing, and waited. Daniel unbuckled his seatbelt. He did not stand up. The plane was moving, and the seatbelt sign was on. But he turned fully sideways in his seat and bent forward so that his eyes were closer to her level, as close as the geometry of an airplane seat allowed. It was an awkward, deliberate posture that communicated intention more clearly than anything he could have opened with, and Emma registered it. He saw her register it. The second earbud came out. "You asked me something," he said. His voice was quiet for her only. In the corridor, before the announcement. He held her gaze. "I had an answer. I should have given it to you then." Emma looked at him steadily. She did not make it easier for him by responding. "Yes," Daniel said. "If you got lost anywhere, anyway, for any reason, I would come find you. That is not a question. There is no version of anything where that answer is different." He said it plainly without embellishment, the way he would state a fact he had verified and was prepared to stand behind. "I need you to know that's true." Emma's jaw shifted slightly. She was thinking. He recognized the expression. It was the same one she made when she was working through a math problem that required more steps than she'd initially expected. He waited. "You haven't been looking," she said. It was not an accusation in tone. It was an observation offered carefully, the way she had offered the detail about the candle store. "Here is a thing I know I am telling you because it is relevant." "No," Daniel said. "I haven't been." He did not qualify it or explain it away. "I was scared. After your mom died, I didn't know what to do with how scared I was, so I put it somewhere else. I put it into work, into logistics, into things that had solutions. And I left you to figure out the scary parts alone." He stopped. The words were there, but they were heavier to say out loud than they had been in his head, and he let that weight be visible. "That was wrong. I'm sorry." Emma's eyes dropped to his hand. She had noticed the bird. He opened his fist and held it out, resting in his palm, small and crooked its wings, asymmetrical its beak a little too wide. Nothing like a sparrow. Nothing like anything that had ever existed in nature. "Your mom made that," Emma said. She had seen it once before, years ago, but she remembered. "In Vermont," Daniel said. "She said it was supposed to be a sparrow." He looked down at it. She wasn't an artist. The corner of Emma's mouth moved. Almost nothing. But something. "She wanted you to have it eventually," Daniel said. "I kept holding on to it because..." He stopped, reorganized. "I kept holding on to it because I didn't know how to let go of things the right way. I kept thinking there was a right moment." He met Emma's eyes. "I think this is the moment." Emma looked at the bird in his palm for a long time. Then she reached out and picked it up with 2 fingers. Careful the way you handle something that has weight. You are only beginning to understand. She turned it over, examined the uneven wings, ran her thumb along the rough patch on the breast, where the carving had gone slightly wrong. "It really doesn't look like a sparrow," she said. "No," Daniel agreed. "It really doesn't." Emma closed her hand around it. She sat with it in her fist, the way Daniel had been sitting with it for 4 years and 11 months, and the plane moved through the dark outside the window, and neither of them said anything for a moment. And the silence was different from every silence that had come before it on this particular night. Not empty, not managed, not a wall between them, but simply space where 2 people were present at the same time, processing the same thing. Then Emma said quietly, "I felt lost." "I know," Daniel said. "I know you did. That's on me." She looked at him. Not the measuring look, not the careful assessment. Just her face 8 years old, tired, still holding the bird not all the way back yet, but not all the way gone either. "Are you going to be different?" she asked. The directness of it was pure Emma, unvarnished. "I'm going to try to actually show up," Daniel said. "Not just be in the room, actually show up." He held her gaze. "You can tell me when I'm not. I want you to tell me." Emma considered this for several seconds. Then, without further declaration or ceremony, she leaned sideways and rested her head against his shoulder. Her hand stayed closed around the wooden bird. She did not put her earbuds back in. Daniel sat very still. He put one arm around her slowly, the way you move around something fragile. Not because she was fragile, but because the moment was. And he had learned tonight what it cost to move too fast through something that deserved to be handled carefully. She did not pull away. She adjusted slightly, finding a better angle, and was still. Outside the window, O'Hare's lights blurred through the snow as the plane taxied toward the runway. The blizzard was still there, indifferent. Enormous, doing what blizzards do. Inside the cabin, a toddler 3 rows back was complaining about something, and a flight attendant was explaining the snack options in a patient-carrying voice, and the ventilation system kept pushing its thin, steady stream of air. All of it was ordinary. Daniel Carter sat in seat 14B with his daughter, leaning against him for the first time in longer than he could honestly say. And the ordinary quality of it, the way it felt like a thing that was simply happening, not a breakthrough or a rescue, just a father and his daughter on a plane, was he understood exactly what it was supposed to feel like. Not dramatic, just real. The plane lifted off the runway at 11:43. The lights of Chicago fell away below, swallowed quickly by cloud and snow. And then there was nothing outside the window but dark. Emma was asleep before they cleared the cloud cover. Her head was still on his shoulder, her breathing slow, and even one hand curled loosely in her lap with the small wooden bird still inside it. She had not let go of it. Daniel looked at her, really looked the way he had been failing to look for 22 months, and let himself feel the full weight of what the night had given back to him, and what he had come very close to letting slip away permanently through nothing more catastrophic than ordinary avoidance. He did not take out his laptop. He did not check his phone. He sat with his arm around his daughter and watched the dark outside the window and let the flight be what it was. Back at O'Hare Terminal, H was still full. The blizzard continued its indifferent work outside the windows, and the departure boards still showed a long column of delays, and the people who had been stranded there were renegotiating their evenings in all the ways that stranded people do, finding corners, making calls, feeding children snacks from carry-on bags, watching weather coverage on mounted TVs, with the philosophical detachment of people who have exhausted their other options. Near gate H7 in the family assistance area, Sophie sat on a chair beside her mother, Laura. The paperwork was finished. The security officer had gone. They were waiting for the status of their own flight to change, and Laura had her arm around her daughter and was doing the thing parents do after a scare, staying physically close, reassuring herself through contact. Sophie was watching the window. Outside, through the glass and the falling snow, a plane was ascending from the runway, a slow, effortful rise into the dark, its lights blinking steadily until the cloud cover closed around it. Laura followed her daughter's gaze. "What are you looking at, Bug?" Sophie watched the last blink of the plane's light before it disappeared. "That man and the girl," she said. "I think they found each other." She said it with the calm certainty of someone reporting a thing she had observed and considered verified, then looked away from the window and reached into her coat pocket for what remained of the candy cane. Laura looked at the empty sky where the plane had been, and then at her daughter, and did not ask what she meant. The snow kept falling. The terminal kept waiting. Somewhere above the clouds on a flight to Portland, Emma Carter slept on her father's shoulder, one hand closed around a lopsided wooden bird that had never looked like a sparrow and never would. And Daniel Carter, who had spent 2 years being present in every way that didn't count, sat still and awake and paid attention.